Today I'm here to share with you one of my favorite forms of art, and that is weaving. And I love weaving for a few reasons. The first is that there's so much cultural and historical significance to it. There are so many cultures across the world that have been weaving for hundreds of years and passed it down through generations. And I just love walking through the markets in, say, Guatemala to see the bright and beautiful and colorful and intricate weavings of that culture. And the other reason is that if you want to try weaving at home, you don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of fancy equipment. You don't have to learn a whole bunch of complicated things just to be able to start one weaving. You can learn one simple stitch and go from there, and just build on things and combine things in new ways. So today I'm going to show you how to create each of these stitches. And this weaving is a little bit too busy for a final weaving that I would hang up in my house. But the point of it was not to hang up and display. The point of it was to show you all the different things that you can try. So like I said, this is really just two types of stitches and then one knot that you can combine in a whole bunch of different ways, with different types of yarn and different colors and different patterns. And you can create really unique and cool things with just a few basic skills. So let's get started. All you need is a piece of foam board or cardboard, a ruler, a pencil, and some scissors. Line the edge of the cardboard up with the first line on the ruler and make a mark every 1/4 of an inch. If it's easier, you can start at the 1-inch mark, then cut that in half, then cut each of those in half. And do that for the whole side. Flip it around and do the same thing on the other end. Take your scissors and cut slits. You may not be able to cut with the tip. You may have to open the scissors as wide as they can go to be able to cut your slits. And cut them all the way across both sides of your cardboard. Then take your string, you want a pretty long tail, enough to tie it at the end, and slide it through that very first notch. Flip it over, pull it straight across and slide it through the first notch on the other end. And instead of pulling it across the back, we're just going to go right next door. And then pull it across again. Next door, across the street. Next door, across the street. And do that the whole way across. When you're finished, it should look like this across the back. And then just tie those two tails together. Before we start weaving with yarn, we're going to add a shed stick, alternating over and under our warp threads. And this is just going to create a nice open space for us to weave with. If your yarn is too fat to fit through the needle, you can pinch it really tight like this, slide it through, and pull it out the other side. Double knot it and you're good to go. Because I'm right-handed, I weave a lot faster going from right to left, so I like to use the space created by the shed stick to move from left to right. You don't want to leave a whole lot of extra on the other side, just a little tail that will tuck in at the very end. You also don't want to pull it all the way up to the top of your loom. You want to leave a nice space so that we're able to hang it at the end. Then when you go back the opposite way, you're going to pick up the warp threads that the shed stick is pressing down, because those are the ones that we went over before, so we're going to go under them now. And again, you don't want to leave a whole bunch of extra. You want to make sure you pull all of that through before you go to the next row. But be careful not to pull it too tight. You want a nice little loop there so that it doesn't start to bow in the middle. And then you just keep zigzagging down. I like to use a fork to really tighten things up after every few rows. If you've done it correctly, you should see a nice brick-like pattern starting to form. I want this white yarn to create a shape that curves at the bottom, so I'm going to start that curve now and not go all the way across again. I'm going to stop about 3/4 of the way. And each row after that is going to be shorter and shorter to create that gradual diagonal line. Like I said before, let those tails hang out. We'll tuck them in at the very end. One of my favorite materials to weave with is called roving, and it's really just wool that hasn't been spun into yarn yet, so it's super fluffy and gives some great texture. And I added just a glittery ribbon on top for a little sparkle. And I'm going to pull it through my warp threads just to add even more texture, and that's called a pile weave. And you can also do the same thing with fabric. Depending on how fat or skinny you cut your strips will determine how it's going to look in your final weaving. You can also combine multiple pieces of yarn together. And that's really fun to do for the pile weave. It's easiest if you knot them. You can use a tool like a pencil to pick up the piles if that's easier for you. But I found it just created more trouble. I prefer to just use my fingers. If I'm going to have a big section of a pile weave, I like to add in 1, maybe 2 rows of just a normal over-under standard weave just to keep things nice and sturdy. Just tightens everything up. You can also add an irregular pile by weaving your entire section and leaving big loops on either side. And then you can just pull through random pieces. And you get almost like polka dots. The Sumac Weave is one of my favorite stitches, and it's so easy to do once you get the hang of it. So just slide your yarn under the first warp thread, then pick up the first warp thread that's on top of your shed stick, wrap it underneath, pull it up and away from you to the left, and then pull it down and towards you to the right. Then pick up the next string that's on top of your shed stick, wrap it underneath, up and away to the left, down towards you to the right. and do that all the way across. When you come back across, you do the same thing, it's just mirrored. So pick up the first warp thread that's on top of the shed stick, then wrap it underneath, except pull it up and away from you to the right and down towards you to the left. And you can see that it starts to create a braid-like texture. You can also do the sumac weave with roving, and I really like to have it start out really small and then it gets bigger and bigger as it goes across. And you do this by twisting it really tight when you first start and wrapping it as tightly as possible around those warp threads. And then as you go along, you loosen it up bit by bit. And then when you're going back the other way, you would do it opposite. You would start out really loose and fluffy and then tighten it as you got further along. Another trick you can try with the sumac weave is to wrap it around your shed stick, and that just creates a little bit of extra texture and adds some pile to the weave. And you may need a partner to help you take out the shed stick. I had a little bit of trouble by myself. If you're wanting to add fringe, then the raya knot is the way to go. Just slide it underneath 2 of your warp threads. Bring those tails together up top, and then pull the loop through the middle of the 2 warp threads and hook the tails through. I could have left these long, but I really wanted the look of super short fringe, almost like pom-poms. So I'm going to cut that extra off pretty short. I also added some fun multicolored fringe across the bottom using the raya knot. If you have a row of raya knots at the bottom, like I did, then you'll definitely need 4, 5, 6 maybe rows of just a plain weave. And tighten that up just to make the bottom nice and sturdy. To take your weaving off your loom, unnotch 1 at the bottom, snip it in half, and double knot it right by your last row of stitches. And do that all the way across. Only unnotch one at a time, because if you cut them all off at once, then your weaving can start to fall apart and you lose track of what's what. If you end up with just one thread at the very end, snip it down at the bottom and just choose one string from your last knot to tie together. And you can leave these hanging or you can snip them off. Now I would suggest that you have a partner hold your weaving up vertically in the air and you snip your fringe that way to make sure it's even, because laying it flat on the table I did not get a very even cut. So just grab a partner and have them help you with that step. And for the top layer of fringe, I just slid a piece of paper underneath so that I could get a clean cut. The top of our weaving we need to remove a little bit differently because it needs to go on a dowel so that it's ready to hang on the wall. So unnotch one, slide in both fingers and twist it, and then line up those loops and slide the dowel through. If you end up with just one string left on the end, just double knot it to that last loop. Once you spread those loops out on the dowel, then you can flip it over and start to tuck in all those tails. So just pull up a warp thread that you see and tuck the yarn underneath.